The universe was a cruel and endless void, indifferent to the lives that flickered briefly before being snuffed out. Across the cosmic expanse, civilizations rose and fell like sandcastles before an unrelenting tide. Some species burned bright, conquering planets and enslaving lesser beings, only to be extinguished by forces greater than themselves. Others lived in quiet insignificance, never daring to challenge the vast empires that ruled the stars. It was an unspoken law of existence, only the strong survived. And among the stars, no one feared anything. There was no need to. The HFY Dominion, the oldest and most powerful empire in the known galaxy, had ruled uncontested for millennia. Their fleets blackened the skies of 1,000 worlds. Their warlords were worshipped as gods, their enemies crushed before they could even raise a hand in defiance. To the HFY, war was not a contest, it was a simple extermination of those foolish enough to resist. And when their eyes turned toward Earth, they saw nothing worth fearing. It was just another primitive world, another species barely scratching at the surface of space travel. The humans were weak, divided, and fragile. They lacked the genetic enhancements of the Drenari, the psionic abilities of the Kryth, or the technological brilliance of the Varkath. By every measurable standard, humans were unimpressive. The invasion was swift, brutal, and absolute. It took 3 days. The first day, the skies darkened with the arrival of their warships, massive constructs that blotted out the sun. Governments crumbled before they could even declare war. The second day, entire cities were turned to ash. The weapons of Earth, nuclear or otherwise, proved useless against their energy shields. The third day, the last human resistance fell. Earth belonged to the HFY. Billions were slaughtered in the initial onslaught. The survivors were herded like cattle, either to serve as slaves or as specimens for experimentation. The once thriving planet was now just another conquered world, stripped of its dignity and life. The HFY celebrated another victory. Another species added to their collection. And yet, something lingered in the ruins. Not hope. Hope had died alongside Earth's final defenders. No, what remained was something far older. Something more dangerous. Rage. He survived. Once, he had a name. Once, he had a family. A life. He was nobody special, just another face in the crowd, another man trying to survive in an uncaring world. But that life was gone now. Burned away in the firestorm that consumed his home. He had watched them die. Watched as his city crumbled, as his people screamed, as the sky itself seemed to weep molten tears. He had tried to fight, like so many others. And like so many others, he had failed. Captured. Beaten. Left for dead. But he did not die. Something inside him refused to break. It wasn't courage. It wasn't some noble sense of duty. It was something raw, something primal, something older than the stars themselves. The HFY did not understand it. To them, humans were just another inferior species, something to be discarded without a second thought. They did not understand what happens when you take everything from a man, his home, his family, his future. They did not understand that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous thing in existence. He did not care about survival. He did not care about vengeance. He cared about destruction. He would not fight for humanity's freedom, humanity was already lost. He would not fight for revenge, his enemies would not suffer as he had suffered. He would fight to destroy them. To make them feel something they had never felt before. Fear. It began with whispers in the slave camps. An HFY patrol slaughtered in the dead of night, their bodies left hanging from the ruins like trophies. A transport ship destroyed before it could leave orbit, its wreckage scattered across the wasteland. The overlords dismissed it at first. Isolated incidents. Acts of desperate, meaningless defiance. Then the disappearances started. Entire garrisons vanishing without a trace. Supply lines disrupted. Key officials found dead in their own chambers, their throats slit with precision. The HFY were not used to fear. They were not used to an enemy they could not see, could not predict. And yet, the terror spread. The man did not fight like a soldier. He did not wage war like the humans before him had. He was not an army, he was something else entirely. He was a shadow in the ruins, a ghost in the darkness. He struck without warning, killed without mercy, and disappeared before they could react. They sent hunters after him. Their best trackers, their most elite warriors. None returned. He did not fight for victory. He fought for annihilation. And the HFY, for the first time in their long, unchallenged history, began to understand what it meant to be prey. Because they had made a mistake. They had believed fear was universal. That every creature, no matter how defiant, would break when faced with enough pain, enough suffering. But fear was a weapon. And in the hands of the right person, it was the most powerful weapon of all. The HFY had spent centuries believing they were invincible. Now, they were learning what it meant to be hunted. And it all started with a single man. A man with nothing left to lose. The first wave of resistance had been futile. Every human who tried to fight back against the HFY had been either killed or captured. The survivors were left in the ruins, waiting for their inevitable fate. For the first time in history, the invaders ruled a world that could not even respond. Earth was no longer Earth, it was a conquest, a memory. But not all had fallen to despair. A few had managed to escape, those who had hidden in the depths of underground bunkers, or fled into the wilderness to avoid capture. These few, in their desperation, began to form loose bands of resistance, hoping for a miracle, a leader who could spark a revolution. But there was no leader. There was only the man who had nothing left to lose. His name had been forgotten. It no longer mattered. In the streets where his family had lived, in the crumbled cities and blasted forests, he had become something else, a symbol. The whispers of his deeds began to spread like wildfire among the enslaved humans. The name became a legend, a shadow, a myth. The man who killed HFY warriors in the dead of night. The man who struck fear into their hearts, who made them bleed, who reminded them what it was like to be vulnerable. The HFY, despite their unmatched technology and unrelenting military power, could not seem to stop him. Their elite trackers and warlords came, but they were never the same after they encountered the man. Some returned to their ships broken, their minds shattered, their bodies marred with scars and wounds. Others, the ones who never returned, were found days later, their bodies discarded in the streets, signs of brutal and merciless torture. But they could not identify the man. He wore no armor, had no insignia, and did not fight in any way that made sense to them. He did not fight with the tactics of an army. He did not fight with conventional weapons. He fought with pure, unrestrained violence, an animalistic rage that could not be contained. He was not a soldier, he was a force of nature. The resistance had no plan. It was just a few scattered souls, trying to hold on to something, anything, until something else, something better, came. But the man had no such illusions. He was not waiting for a savior, nor did he care about the survival of Earth or its people. What drove him was something else, something darker. It was a need for destruction, for vengeance, for the release of his suffering. The HFY had destroyed everything he loved. They had taken everything he had. And now, he would take everything they had. He would burn their empire to the ground, one warlord at a time. The invaders didn't know what was coming. They had underestimated the power of a man with nothing left to lose. They believed they could simply crush him, erase him from existence as they had done with so many others. But that would prove to be their fatal mistake. It wasn't just the man who was fighting. No, the legend of his actions spread to the other enslaved humans. His name became a rallying cry. And though the people were weak, they were still human, and humans were resilient. They might have been broken, but they were not beyond repair. The hope that had been extinguished began to flicker once more, fueled by the fires of defiance the man had set. The Isvar realized too late that they had awakened something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. They had underestimated the human spirit, something that could not be enslaved, crushed, or wiped away. It lived in the bones of every person, a quiet fire that waited for the right moment to burn everything in its path. The man was a ghost, appearing in places where he was least expected. He attacked in the dead of night, slipping in and out of the shadows with lethal precision. There was no strategy, no clever plots. He simply moved, his fury guiding him. He killed every Isvar he came across with brutal efficiency, leaving no survivors, no witnesses. One night, he stormed an Isvar stronghold. The compound was heavily guarded, with walls that were thought impenetrable to human weapons. The Isvar had made the mistake of thinking no one would dare challenge them there. But the man didn't need to breach the walls. He didn't need weapons. He needed nothing except the element of surprise, his burning rage, and the knowledge that he would never stop until every last one of them was dead. He killed 20 Isvar soldiers in less than 15 minutes. With no more than a few stolen blades, he sliced through their ranks, his movements fluid and unrelenting. He was not a man anymore, he was an animal, a force of nature, as unpredictable and unstoppable as the storms that raged across Earth's shattered landscape. The invaders sent more troops, more advanced units to quell this uprising. They could not comprehend what they were facing. They had never encountered an enemy so singular in purpose, so driven by a personal vendetta that they could not fathom its depths. Days turned into weeks. The number of deaths piled up. The Isvar began to panic. The thought of their empire crumbling at the hands of a single, nameless human was a concept too absurd for them to fully understand. They gathered their warlords, their leaders, the most powerful beings in the galaxy, to confront him, to destroy him once and for all. But when they arrived, they found nothing. No armies. No resistance. Just a single man standing in the middle of a field, surrounded by the bodies of their fallen soldiers. He was drenched in their blood, his eyes wild with madness, but also with something else, something they could not place. The man did not speak. He didn't need to. He was the last thing the Isvar would ever fear. And as they finally realized the magnitude of their mistake, they understood that the cost of underestimating humanity was far higher than they could have ever imagined. The night was dark, colder than it had ever been. The once blue skies were now a sickly orange, the atmosphere crackling with the energy of broken worlds. The invaders had pushed their way through the outer regions of Earth, seeking the last pockets of human resistance. Every inch of the planet's surface had been scorched and bled dry, but they could not extinguish the fire that had ignited within the humans. That fire, they now realized, was no longer a mere spark, it was an inferno. The man. No longer just a shadow in the ruins, but the embodiment of everything they feared, was about to confront the final battle. In the last fortress of the Isvar on Earth, their greatest warlord awaited, a towering figure whose reputation was forged in the destruction of entire star systems. He was a living legend among his people, a being who had destroyed entire civilizations with nothing more than the mere flick of his hand. To him, this human, this nameless, broken man, was nothing more than an inconvenience, an anomaly that had to be eradicated for the sake of the Empire's pride. The warlord stood on a high platform, overlooking the field below. His armor was adorned with the insignia of the Isvar Dominion, a reflection of his power. He had fought battles for centuries, but this one felt different. It wasn't just another enemy to conquer. This was personal. Beneath him, in the smoke-filled air, the man stood alone. He was covered in the blood of his enemies, his face a mask of fury and madness. His body was a map of scars and bruises, but there was no fear left in him, not of pain, not of death, not of the enemy. He had nothing left to lose. He had already seen his world burn, and now, he had come to bring their destruction. "You are a fool," the warlord's voice boomed through the speakers, a deep, resonant sound. "You think you can defeat me? You think you can stop the might of the HFY?" The man's eyes, wild and burning with an unquenchable rage, locked on him. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. "Your people are gone," the warlord continued. "Your planet is destroyed. You are nothing but a pathetic, dying race. And yet, you persist. Why?" The man stepped forward, his boots crunching against the cracked earth. His every movement was deliberate, each step infused with the weight of his purpose. "I fight for the ones you took," he finally spoke, his voice low but heavy with the weight of 1,000 deaths. "I fight for the ones who never had a chance to fight back." The warlord sneered. "You think your vengeance means anything? You are insignificant, just like the rest of your people. Your blood will spill, and nothing will change." The man's grip tightened around the blade he held, its edge shimmering with the reflection of the dying stars above. He had fought for nothing but the memory of his lost family, the images of his dead comrades, and the desire to erase the invaders from existence. The thought of his planet's once thriving cities, now reduced to ash and ruin, filled his heart with such an overwhelming fury that it threatened to burst from his chest. "You are wrong," the man whispered, his eyes locking onto the warlord's. "It is you who is nothing." And with that, he charged. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The universe held its breath. The warlord's eyes widened for the briefest of seconds as the man closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. His every move was fueled by years of grief, rage, and a need for retribution that could not be quelled. The first strike landed, so fast, so brutal, the warlord barely had time to react. The blade sliced across his armor with an unearthly screech, sending sparks flying into the air. The warlord grunted, surprised by the ferocity of the human's attack. For the first time in centuries, he felt a flicker of fear, something he had never known before. "You think your power can save you," the warlord snarled, pulling back and raising his massive weapon to strike. But the man was already gone, vanishing into the smoke and chaos. He was like a shadow, unpredictable, relentless. Each time the warlord tried to strike, the man was already gone, his blows landing with deadly accuracy. His strikes were not just physical, they were driven by something far darker, far deeper. He was fighting not for survival, but for the complete and utter destruction of everything the HFY represented. The warlord roared in frustration, unleashing a wave of energy so powerful it shattered the ground beneath them. But the man was too quick, too relentless. He had already anticipated the move, already moved out of the way. With a guttural yell, the man leapt into the air, his blade raised high. And with a single, decisive strike, the man drove the blade deep into the warlord's chest. The warlord gasped, a look of shock in his eyes as the blade tore through his armor and into his heart. For the first time in his life, he knew what it was to be mortal. To feel pain. To be vulnerable. "You were never meant to conquer," the man whispered, his voice a low, savage growl. "You were just another predator. And now, you are the prey." The warlord staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His body began to collapse as the life drained from him. But before he fell to the ground, his eyes locked with the man's. And in that moment, the universe felt it, the shift. The balance that had been disrupted. The terror that the HFY had once instilled in countless worlds was now returned to them. The invaders had fallen. The man had won. And as the last remnants of the warlord's power flickered out, the man stood victorious, alone in the ruins of an empire that had once feared nothing. The warlord's body lay motionless, a symbol of the fall of an empire that had once feared no one. The HFY dominion crumbled, their power extinguished in a single, bloody moment. Yet, for the man standing amidst the wreckage, there was no triumph. His hands, stained with the blood of his enemies, trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what he had done. He had avenged his family, his world, but in the process, he had lost himself. There was no celebration. No relief. Only silence. The cost of victory was too high. Earth was a broken, scorched shell of what it had been, and so was he. The battle was won, but there was no peace for him. He had fought for so long, but now that the war was over, he found himself with nothing left to fight for. The universe would forget his name, and the memory of this day would fade. But his journey was not over. With the HFY gone, there was only one thing left for him to do: walk away from the ruins of a world he had once called home. He had nothing to lose, and now, nothing left to prove. The war was over, but the story of humanity was just beginning.